for joining us today. We're excited to finally be hosting our webinar, Stormproof Your Bookings. And I just want to call out that we do apologize that we had to reschedule from our original August date. We had some real life stormproofing happening here on the Outer Banks where Scott and I live. So we appreciate your patience and we're happy to finally get the show on the road today. So again, I'm Grace Souter. I'm the Director of Marketing Services here at Inhabit, and I'm joined today by Tim Woodward, Jared Paglialonga, and of course, Scott Leggat. And we have a very packed program and we have a very chatty group. So we're going to just jump right in and get rolling. On the agenda, we are going to talk about why is this important? There's so many ways that storms or disasters can impact our business, and we just want you to understand why you need to be prepared and how to prepare. We will talk about disaster plan, and we're going to cover 4 main points and just kind of streamline that for you. And then we're going to dive into the timeline of implementing that disaster plan and, the pace at which you need to go as you have an approaching event. So Tim, do you want to talk to us about the potential impacts to your business when we're talking about disasters?
Yeah, can you back up one slide? You skipped my previous one. There we go. Yeah, definitely. We'll dive into both of those. When we talk about natural disasters, there's really 2 classifications, and it does kind of tie into the planning and stuff we're going to talk about here. The one that most everybody's familiar with is hurricanes and tropical storms, and they're mostly predictable. I mean, it's not perfectly predictable. There's a lot of people that think they are, but they're not. But it's the one, it's coming, you have warning. When you get into the unpredictable events, you'll see wildfires, severe weather, volcanoes, even pandemic. I mean, or local events, a bridge, something hitting a bridge and taking it out, or a road failing. You don't know those are going to happen until all of a sudden, boom, it just happened one day. And both of those you can plan for. It's not perfect. We're going to walk through that, but just kind of laying them all out there of, what kind of things we might be talking about. Then as we progress kind of into what can be affected by disasters on the next slide, you'll see everything from, obviously it affects your rental units, your properties. That's the biggest one. But there's a lot of things that you may not always think about when you're going to, access, getting into roads. We're all going to reference a lot of things throughout this, but different events, but I'll use the Maui fires and Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina. A lot of times there was units that weren't even touched, but it was the access to the unit that caused a lot of loss of time and everything else. It obviously affects your employees. We're going to talk about that a lot. They are one of your top priorities for your units, your owners, everything else. It's your employees. So that is the number one concern. Guest owners, they both are affected with it. One that's overlooked a lot of times is your brand and your image, and it's how you react to the adversity of a disaster or a storm that can sometimes be a positive thing, and how you do that. And it also could be a very bad thing if you ignore it. Future bookings, just, a lot of times we'll see people say, oh, I don't want to hurt our bookings in the future because I don't want to say stuff about the storm. That is a consideration, and it can affect your future bookings. But people also know, especially if you're in a predictable area with hurricanes, people will be, they're booking there, they know there's a chance there could be a storm. So you're not, by not sharing that, you're not hiding it from them. And even just the business as a whole. And then just for fun, to test people's memory, this is not a complete list because I'm sure we missed something. I think Scott called one out immediately when we put it up the other day. But this was just an example of events that we've, as Inhabit as a whole, have had people that have been affected by in one way, shape, or form. And you see there, obviously hurricanes dominates this. Fires are kind of prevalent. There's been a few flooding events that have actually tied into rentals, even a volcanic issue in Hawaii a couple years ago. And of course, I think everybody everybody was affected by COVID. So that falls in a disaster. That's just as bad as anything else, and that's what you plan for contingency wise. So that's kind of why we're here. So
yeah, absolutely. This is not a one-off thing. It happens regularly, and it seems like it's happening more and more regularly, depending on where you live. But yeah, some disaster plan basics. The time to plan for a disaster is not when you're like in the cone, if you're in a hurricane prone area or during fire season, you don't want to be coming up with a plan when the storm's headed your way. You want to have a plan that's ready to go and it's in place and it can be executed at any time. So it's a little bit overwhelming to know where to start. So we kind of broke it down into 4 categories for you. People and safety always needs to be your first priority. You need to make good decisions to protect your team and your guests. Communication is next. Your communication during a storm or a disaster is arguably the most important thing you will do. So you want to have an excellent plan in place and have a team equipped to execute that plan. Facilities and infrastructure. Probably the next most important thing you need to do is to be ready to prepare your office locations and your rental units for a pending disaster. We've got some great tools that we can share with you to help you do that really efficiently. And then operations and continuity. How will you continue to operate your business beyond this immediate emergency? We want to help you prepare for that too. So first up, as I just mentioned, your communication during a storm. We're going to talk about hurricanes a lot for the purpose of this webinar, so I'm going to switch over and talk about storms specifically, but your communication is probably the most important part of your plan. How often and how you're communicating can really dictate whether your team and your brand emerges these types of situations successfully. So you want to put a lot of emphasis into your communication during a storm. First off, your internal communication. Set up an internal communication group so you can keep track of your teammates and your employees all in one place. You want to have a clear protocol for checking in and, a regular cadence for that with their manager. You want to know where your team is. Some of them are going to choose to evacuate and some of them are going to choose to shelter. And if they're sheltering, you want to know where they're at. If they choose to evacuate, you want to know how far away they are. And you definitely want to have emergency contact information for all of your team members. External communications for guests and owners. This is so critical. You want to set expectations for when and how your guests are going to hear from you. A regular cadence is ideal. At least once a day is great, but twice a day is even better. Where I live, again, here on the Outer Banks, we generally see these updates come out twice a day along with the National Weather Service update. So I think that's like 11 and 5. I could be wrong, but just, an expectation that guests who are following along or homeowners can look forward to and rely on. Certainly don't rely on one mode of communication, especially as the storm is kind of in progress. It's very, very common for something to go down. You lose power, you lose internet. So you want to have this communicated in multiple platforms. Definitely need a space on your website, a dedicated landing page for the storm and any updates that might be taking place. Social media is a great way to get in front of a lot of people all at once. Text messages are great. Emails is probably more effective for homeowner communication than guests, but emails are certainly a great way to kind of let them know what the plan is and set some expectations for future updates and what you're going to be doing behind the scenes. And then just a note with all of, especially emails in particular, but with all of your marketing, you want to make sure that your messages are not conflicting. So if you have automations that are scheduled to hit incoming guests or anything like that, you probably just want to turn them off. You don't want to confuse them with, one message saying that there's an evacuation, and then the next message they get is, this is, what you can expect while you're here, or anything like that. So also want to include some emergency links through your county. The National Weather Service is a great link to include along with NOAA. And in terms of your communication plan, it's not a bad idea to have a team member or potentially an entire team staged out of the forecasted disaster area to manage the communications if you were to lose power or internet, or, if the storm impacts ended up being more serious or potentially more extended, then you've got your communication covered. You do not want to have that lapse. And then the final piece of this is the marketing. Specifically, it's a great idea to have a playbook that's in place and ready for your team so that they don't have to be reinventing the wheel or coming up with all of these methods on the fly. It's just there, it's ready, they can pick it up, every time the alarm bell rings. At Blue Tent, my team actually has a disaster playbook that they reach out and present to their clients when something like this happens. So the client doesn't have to think about it. We reach out and we say, listen, we're going to go ahead and get, a banner up on your website. We can get some messaging out to your guests. If there's anything, I'll update your landing page. If there's anything else that you need, you just let us know and we will handle that for you. And then a final note is it's not a bad idea to have a Google Analytics annotation in your reporting. So as you're looking at future years and you see an anomaly, you can recall, oh, that was because of, Hurricane Aaron or potentially whatever it was. And then there could be some positives too. When we talk about marketing, there's a lot of eyes all of a sudden on your market and on your business. And if you're savvy and wise about it, then you can really capitalize. First off, just a reminder, we're going to talk about trip insurance a lot, but definitely always be prioritizing trip insurance in your marketing messaging and in your guest communication. If you have a bad storm where you have guests who received their money back because of trip insurance and they were really pleased about that, have them write you a testimonial, put that on your website. That's a great way to market that product beyond this immediate disaster. A webcam. When there's a storm or something kind of interesting going on in a certain part of the world, like we all want to see it. So if you can get a link to a webcam or a few potentially on your website, that's a great idea to drive some traffic. Same thing with social media. It's not just for ads. If you have somebody who is able to take some pictures, maybe of your team doing preparation, or what does the beach look like during a storm? Everybody's always curious about that. What's it like there? Go for it. Put videos up, put pictures up there. That's a great way to get some engagement and reinforce your brand to your audience. A landing page with updates and helpful links. Again, you can just drive people there for helpful information. And as you're driving all of this traffic to your website, a little email like sign up pop-up is a great way to capture all of that contact information. You can add them right into your mailing list and start marketing to them for the next year and the next vacation. So there's a lot going on in the communication and the marketing front during a storm. Even if your marketing team isn't out prepping homes, they are going to be extremely busy during this event. So having some things in place and ready made for them it's really gonna help them out. Did I miss anything? Anything to add?
I don't think so, Grace. I think to your point, there's so many different ways we can be proactive, right? And get ahead of the messaging for different operators in different kinds of markets. What is interesting is the worst plan is unilaterally the same across all different markets, and that is doing nothing, right?
Mhm.
So that understanding your local area and what is going to be needed and doing those things in advance of when you need to and stuff hits the fan, right? Is critical, and having those pieces in place because you're not gonna have time to get the webcam set up if the storm is on your doorstep.
Yeah, that's a great point. It seems like more and more, it just seems like it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So being prepared for the sake of your business and your homeowners is really important. Here are just some great examples of storm communications that we came across. This one is from Midget Realty. I'm going to read it out loud. Now that Hurricane Matthew has passed, we're trying to get teams to our offices to assess damages. Thank you for your continued patience and support as we are trying to get back to a point where we can resume operations as normal. Please stay tuned for more information as it becomes available. So again, they're just communicating like we're not necessarily sitting in front of our computers right now. We're out trying to get to the office. We're clearing roads. We're, digging out our cars, but bear with us and you will hear from us soon. And then this one here, this was from Outer Beaches right after Hurricane Irene. And it was just a simple link, that didn't have a lot of time probably to put into a post, but just sort of letting people know for our 5 p.m. post Irene update, please visit the website. And I love this comment from somebody who said, everyone at your office is amazing. To be so busy cleaning up yet still able to keep us visitors informed is amazing. This is why we continue to use you for our vacations. And we love the Big Kahuna. Great house. Can't wait to be there next August, if not sooner. So again, just reinforcing your brand, building that engagement and that loyalty with your clients and your guests and letting them know that you're doing the best that you can.
And for those that don't know, Irene's probably one of the bigger ones to hit in recent years that ended up resulting in a new bridge eventually being built. So they were posting a lot in that one. They did a very good textbook, campaign on that, keeping everybody informed, and it went on for a while.
Absolutely. That's
And
absolutely.
Scott, it sounds like they're doing also there what you had mentioned as well, right? About how setting that expectation each time, if you're texting them at 11 a.m., we set that expectation of when the next communication is going to be, right? So they're never left wondering, which I thought was extremely effective because if they don't know when they're next going to hear from you, it's an invitation for everyone to be reactive again and take us out of that proactive space.
Absolutely. All right. So we're going to talk about facilities and infrastructure prep and assessment. This is kind of the next big thing. So, Jared, can you talk us through some of the ways that some of the tools that we might have that can assist somebody with this process? There's so much going on. I'm thinking of people or, companies with hundreds of units that they have to get to, and then they have to prep them and they have to document that, and then they have to communicate that. How do you do it?
Well, don't try and do it on the fly, obviously, as a first starters, right? So we want to build these things out in advance, have a system where in your CRM, whether that's in your software, if it's able to do that for you, or another tool, have messaging built out, right? With what sort of expectations we might set in the event of a storm or other disaster that might befall us, right? To have that so that you can reach out to the guests and either text, email, or give them a push notification on their guest app to say, hey, would you pretty please bring in that patio furniture, for us from the condo, if you don't mind. Or setting a go bag that you and your team can have to go to assess properties after the storm and having that prepared, or a checklist that they can run through when they're on site to see before or after the storm what is the damage or what damage can we avoid, right? Let's clean out the fridge in the event that that power goes out, and running through a simple list of items that they can action.
That. And it's, similar for preparing the office, but you have a kind of a different set of priorities and a whole nother thing to think about as far as like supplies and all types of stuff like that. So there's a bunch of things on this list and I can run through it really quick, but then I have a question for Scott. So obviously in your office, you have to protect your technology. You've got computers, you've got servers, you've got all kinds of, stuff going on. A plastic bag generally will probably cover you to the best extent that you can. You want to secure the building, the doors and the windows, all that. Make sure everything's buttoned up really well. Check on hazards and liabilities. You don't want your sign flying around the community and potentially damaging somebody else's property. So you either take it down or you tie it down or you board it up. Company vehicles, you want to move them to a place where they're not going to be flooded or potentially damaged. Same thing with any kind of outside furniture. And I know that there's a few other things on this list that Scott came up with. Scott, a lot of these things really came from your real life experience. So can you share any like tips or lessons or stories on how you have arrived at some of these preparation tips here?
Well, excuse me, I think we just did it through experience, and each time is a learning experience, and you're a little better prepared. When you're talking about prep, that begins months and months and months before hurricane season or whatever threats that you're dealing with. All the entire staff needs to know what the plan is. For instance, we had routes, and as I think you mentioned earlier, things that you were going to need when you were securing the houses. So we had kits put together with ropes and tie down straps, and just everybody had a route. At that time, most places had keys, and so you had all their keys on a ring. You had how communications were going to occur. And one thing that, tagging on to something that was said earlier about doing your daily updates, you need to, well before the storm, let your guests and your owners know when to expect those updates, because they become very habituated to us and to that. And at times, national news feeds would be tapping into our website to get updates because that was more reliable for them than any other source that they had. So this really all begins very, very early on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And even, when we were kind of telling stories and preparing for this discussion and we were talking about the equipment you needed and I was like, "Oh, I forgot about that. And we need four-wheel drive vehicles." And I was like, "And bug spray." Like you just wouldn't think of that ahead of time, but when there's no air conditioning and that like post-storm stagnant humidity in the air, you don't want to have to go track down bug spray from somebody. So there's definitely, to your point, much of this has come by through learning it the hard way, I think. This is cool. Jared, can you tell us what we're looking at right now?
Yeah, so this would be a checklist that if you were to send, let's say, we didn't have an in-house guest that we could text to bring in the furniture. We could send out the team in advance of the storm or other event to say, hey, are those shutters closed? Is the patio furniture brought in? And are the trash cans secured? And we could also add, something like we mentioned about the fridge so that we can ensure that we're being good stewards of the home and actioning these things for our owners to take care of their place before the event occurs.
I
So
think
this
this
is
is
something
good.
you could set up a process for to eliminate that potentiality for error rather than trying to remember to do it all on the fly, right?
Jared, I love the list because I mean, sometimes like Scott was saying, you can have a set thing of these are the people that are going to go to whatever house, but sometimes if it comes up quicker, it's like all hands on deck. And now you have people that probably haven't been in a rental house for 2, 3 months. It's not just your maintenance team, it's people that don't know what they're checking. And if you have a set checklist, you don't have time to make sure they're trained to go do a house. You say, here's the list, go do these things, and they have a clear list and it was done. It's not like, oh, I didn't think about checking the fridge,
Oh yeah.
you don't have that. So this is beautiful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like real-time tracking so that it's customizable per unit to your point as well, and extremely clear what needs done for which unit when.
I love that. And from a homeowner perspective, being able to see like, okay, it's done. I don't have to worry about this. They
Yeah.
took care of it for me. That's excellent.
We could once it's completed, like set for this specific checklist, like an automation to send to the owner, even Grace, right? To show that we're doing our job, without having to remember to one by one email them that we are doing that and sorting them out.
I love that.
Yeah.
Again, communication, you can't over communicate in a situation like this. So operations and business continuity. And again, I'm gonna really lean on Scott here because I think if there's somebody who's been through plenty of storms and has survived and thrived, it's Scott Leggett. So can you talk us through some of these things that we need to think about?
Yeah, so you have to have a system in place, and and it's an evolving thing with each event. I remember, we assign a team typically of two to go together to secure the houses, to make sure all the window latches are down, make sure the garbage cans are lashed down, that the outdoor deck furniture is secured and brought in, and any number of those things. And we used to send them out with clipboards. Eventually, we went to tablets, which worked a lot better because we could collate that information very quickly and then also send reports to the homeowner, hey, your home has been secured here. And one thing I would say to this is that you should be charging for that service if you're not. We did. We were very good to our employees. They stayed and put their lives at risk through a storm. Oftentimes their families evacuated away from them to the mainland. So we paid them very well during that period. And the way we were able to do that is that work was charged, I think about depending on the size of the home, $100 to $150 a piece to secure those. And that's a good incentive to get your people to stay. But the other thing that we did a great job with is lining up vendors in advance, because you're going to find that carpet people, roofers, carpenters, water extraction people are going to be at a premium, and it could be weeks before they get to you. And in our case, where our vulnerability is hurricanes, those hurricanes are coming in on tropical winds, and if water has infiltrated the house, 24 hours later, you're going to see black mold growing on the drywall and on the carpets and things like that. So these things need to be timely, and you need to have your team in place, well trained, understand what the process is. And when you're pairing people, you want to pair an experienced person with somebody that maybe has not gone through a hurricane. The other thing I would like to touch on is insurance, because this really comes into play more after the storm. But oftentimes, well, most likely, if you have a bad event, they're not the adjusters that are coming in to assess the damage are not familiar with your area. most of the time when we've had events here, the adjusters are coming from all over the country, from Florida, from Texas, and other places that have vulnerability, but they don't know anything about your area. They don't know the cost of re-roofing. They don't know that the cost of materials going to a remote location is a lot more expensive as the cost of labor can be. And so they will often, not deliberately, maybe deliberately, but they try to lowball you. And unless you're familiar with that, and you need to be familiar with the provisions of your insurance policy. For instance, in many places in Florida, as Jared reminded me the other day, in North Carolina, they have a loss of income provision that's mandated in the homeowner policy. So if that home is not available for rent, the owner will be made whole. That being said, if you want to be made whole, you have to have, as part of your owner contract, a provision that in there that says your homeowner policy must include the name of your company as an additionally insured. So in other words, they may get the loss of income, say it was $1,000 rental at a 20% commission. The insurance company is going to say, well, we're going to make you whole at $800 because you wouldn't have got that 20% to begin with. But the company who's, you take the damage of a single homeowner and multiply that many times over, it could put a company under very quickly. So you need to do that. And you need to also understand that those adjusters that are coming from other places are not aware of those provisions. I've had any number of conversations and they insist, oh, that doesn't have that in there. And so you can go right to the policy and show them. And the last thing I would add to that is if a house is damaged by a storm or an event in late August, and it's not going to be available for the rest of the season, but in late August, it only had 5 bookings for the remainder of the year. You can go back historically and show the history of that house that it normally would have had 10 bookings. So you can even get compensation for the bookings that weren't on the books when the storm hit.
Absolutely. And to your point, Scott, like the adjusters in Florida don't seem to know anything about the policies for loss of business either, as it would so happen very conveniently, I might add, to everyone who's joining us today. So if you are a company where you've started your business 22, 23, and we haven't experienced this yet, and we don't have loss of income and yourself as an additional insured on that homeowner policy, you're at risk. Okay, would be the message I would give to you loud and clear today. And next year, Hurricane Delilah, goodness forbid, may come along and take away all the hard sweat, tears, equity you've built. And we don't want to see that. So if that's something that you don't have today on your agreements or anything like that, feel free to reach out to either Scott or myself. We'd be happy to walk you through it and explain the necessity of how to protect yourself. As we don't want you to have your only due means of recourse to be to sue your homeowner in court for that rental revenue, is what he was explaining before, to put it in very bare terms for everyone here today, which is not fun. And that's not what any of us would want to do in that situation, I'm certain.
And presumably you also have business insurance of your own that covers you for damages to your buildings from your loss of incomes to the storm. You're not going to be able to collect on 100% of those bookings, but insurance is an aspect of just being in business, and you need to make sure that your coverage covers you for loss of income, loss of business.
Yeah, I think keeping with the insurance theme and all that, I mean, not only with the homeowners, but I think that kind of flows into the guest also, is just, it starts way ahead of time. You have to be offering travel insurance. Which I hopefully everybody on this call is, but you need to be doing it in a way that's really showing the importance, and that you're documenting that you're doing it and you're putting it out there. Because regardless of how much you offer anything else, you will end up at a point where somebody is upset because they didn't buy insurance, they don't get their money back, and it's canceled and they have no recourse. And you're stuck, between the middle of upsetting a guest or giving up money. And that's not a winnable solution for anybody. And it can, as you look at the bigger things like we've talked about with your brand and your image, that can really hurt you. So there are a lot of strategies with the travel insurance that, selling that I know Blue Tent can help you with. I know Rental Guardian can help you with that. Really, I mean, even down to the point of cancel for any reason is a great policy on the Rental Guardian. I think they're all great ways to put that in. And, that helps protecting people when they get here. And then likewise coming out of this, people see a storm, that storms are in mind. When they rebook, they're going to think, I probably should get insurance, or I'm coming next year. I was hit by, I had to leave 2 days early because there was a storm this year. Okay, I'm getting insurance next year, so I at least get something for those 2 nights. It's part of the process. Yes, it lets you make some extra money, but it's more importantly to do everything you can to keep your guest happy, despite what they might choose. Keep them as happy as they can be, so they're not mad at you.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to actually win them over and even be more reliable because they had insurance. So
it behooves us to over communicate it, right? Like if you right now, guys, only have the one email that might go out offering the travel insurance, I'd recommend you even look at, over communicate. And like if we are like, depending on where you're at, like if you're in an area that might be affected by hurricanes, have a specific communication that goes out during the season, potentially to add a text to that email you might already be sending. As if you didn't offer them to protect their vacation rental investment and they didn't see it, they're going to be more upset, to Tim's point, than if they offered and declined and they had something adversely affect their stay potentially.
We had website clients that on the checkout page, they would choose, do you want travel insurance? And if they clicked no, it would pop up a box. Like if they were staying in the summer, it would pop up a box and say, are you really sure? Because we get hurricanes. I mean, it was nicer words than that, but it's we get hurricanes and your stay could be interrupted. This will protect you. Otherwise, you won't get your money. I mean, they spelled it out very clear. And, there was conversion on people like, oh, maybe I should rethink this and go ahead and book it. So
And then a follow-up email on top of that. You're exactly right. There's good,
follow-up
so
everywhere.
many reasons to have several layers there when it comes to travel insurance. Great stuff. Go ahead, Scott.
I see a post in here that it may have been from Jared, actually, when a federal disaster area is declared, all of Florida contracts are void. In North Carolina, the vacation rental industry, short-term rental industry is regulated by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And there is a regulation in North Carolina that says that if you offer travel insurance and the guest decides they don't want to take advantage of it, they are assuming all liability on themselves. In other words, if they were offered travel insurance and they declined, there's no refund. So that's the way the law is written here, and it's very protective. So, and quite honestly, I bet the takedown rate on the Outer Banks is probably the highest of any area for travel insurance in the country. But encouraging your guests to do that and not assume that liability, because we're talking about storms, but we've all been through the experience. Anything can disrupt a vacation, and that insurance is really a great product for them to have.
I'm glad you said that. I was about to jump in, but we could probably talk about trip insurance all day.
In the different providers, I saw some of the comments like about for it. Some of the different insurance providers have different provisions around that. That's actually kind of what led Rental Guardian to be what it was. We mentioned Hurricane Irene. That's some of their origins goes back to that, because there was some issues with evacuations, non-evacuations, disaster areas and stuff. And so each of them have a little different how their policies cover and how they do it and how it's protected. So I think it's definitely something to talk with whoever you're using for insurance. And if you're not sure, I mean, I love Rental Guardian. They're great people, and they know the ins and outs that I think I know a lot, and they surprise me how much I don't know. So they are experts at it. They can definitely help, and they should be familiar with a lot of the different markets and states, and there's even some regional places that are limited. So I would encourage you, if you have concerns with that, how you could maybe do better, reach out. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah. And it's only more like Sharon, I think, believe posted that in the chat. Like it's only more important, to their point, to have it in a state like Florida where those contracts are void, that you have protection with your insurance policy, right? When the rental contracts are no good anymore, that we need that LOI, loss of income insurance in that scenario. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm going to keep us moving here because we still have a lot more to talk about. And we're now going to put our plan into practice. So there is a storm coming our way. It's Hurricane Irene. And Tim, talk to us about how we're going to purchase. When are we going to start communicating? When do we need to worry about units? What comes first?
You definitely want to be watching. You always want to be ready. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, added habit. We know what's going on with storms. A lot of times it's me because I can be a weather nerd. But when it comes to storms and those predictable things, we're watching. We know we know that there's at least a threat to watch before it's even a threat. A lot of clients that, people I know on the Outer Banks, they're watching too. And we, like with this last time around with Aaron, before it was even a named storm, we had a list of potential areas that could be impacted, and we had a list ready. Our team reached out to people to say, hey, we're here to help. Do you need help? Grace mentioned like the playbook plan and everything else. We're watching and helping and getting people along that way. As far as, the clients, I mean, obviously it's the prep stuff we mentioned above, getting everything ready, having it all queued up, your kits, your plan and everything else. I think no plan is perfect. Everything's going to have some flexibility, but the thing is probably not waiting till it's too late. If you think, oh, it's not, a storm's not going to hit till Thursday, we'll board up things on Tuesday. Well, if all of a sudden it gets a little bit more severe, it's not even getting sooner, just it gets more severe and more people decide to leave. Now you have half your staff and you don't have time. Do those things that you can do ahead of time. Yes, sometimes it ends up being a lot of work for nothing, but it's better to have the time to do it and have it done and undo it than not get it done and have a house get destroyed or something else. And that goes through everything. It's all really planning that time out based off when you think you're going to have to do something. So like we said, communicating outwardly to guests, I think it's setting those internal limits of, okay, well, right now it's forecasted we might have to evacuate on Tuesday. So we're going to see what the weather looks like on Friday and make a decision if we're working on the weekend or not. And based on that decision on Friday, you might say, well, okay, we think we're okay. We're going to revisit again on Sunday. You kind of set those safeguards instead of just everybody wondering, are we going to do something or not? So I think preparation is important on all aspects. Everybody, as we go through these kind of before, during, and after, we're building to, it's going to get chaotic. It's the stronger the storm it is, the worst of event it is, it's going to get more chaotic. How chaotic it gets depends on how bad it is. But that preparation, the more you can do there, the lower you can make that curve of chaos be in the process. So I think there's
And the last, sorry, Tim, the last bullet point there, give your team time to prepare. Taking care of your team may be the most important thing you can do in one of these events. You've got people literally putting their lives at risk, separating families. Your employee may be staying, but their family may be going somewhere else out of the storm's path. And in those places to go become quickly filled up too, because departing guests are getting all the hotel, motel rooms and that. So one of the things we did is we would secure rooms in motels on the mainland to send our employees to or their families to.
Yeah. You all have probably very loyal, dedicated employees that I'm pretty sure a lot of them would be willing, that if you asked them that something had to be done, they're willing to sacrifice prepping their own house to get something ready for the business. And I think keep that in mind as you ask things, that sometimes, you want to make sure they're taken care of, but also, know that limitation of they're going to do that. So be prepared to take care of them in other ways, like Scott said, with the hotel rooms or, cots on the floor or whatever, take, food, feeding sometimes people in the preparation efforts. That goes a long way, just keeping them charged. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to jump over to weathering the storm. Again, to everyone's point right now, just taking care of each other and keeping an eye on one another, staying in contact. This is, important for everybody's safety, but it's also important because if something has changed with the storm track or it has gained intensity or potentially come in a different way, conditions could be different than anticipated on different parts of the island or wherever you are. But it's just kind of good to have that internal line of communication so you can keep tabs on your team and on the storm itself. Continue to update your guests and your homeowners. Again, this is why that remote team is so important if that's something that you're able to do. And my suggestion would be just to kind of have a cutoff time where you're going to turn the communication over to that team, get through the storm event, and then pick it up on the other side if you're able to do that. But that way you at least have a consistent line of communication to the people who are following along. And then, of course, be safe. I was talking earlier, it's very tempting when you are in a storm situation, especially when you've been in prep mode for so many days, to want to, fix it all. Or if you see something wrong, or if you see, somebody's window broken or something, to try to run across the street and help your neighbor. But your role once you've locked the door on that office and you've come home is to take care of yourself and to take care of your family and your own property if necessary. And, you come out the other side and then that's when you can jump in and work on mitigating any damage that may have happened.
Grace, this is, I think, a good point. I just kind of was thinking as I was looking here, we've been talking a lot with just storms, But at this point, while we say weathering the storm, if you say weathering the disaster, this is the point where we kind of turn that point from preparation to a disaster. And I know we've all probably gotten, Scott probably has a lot more stories than I do, but like people I've talked to from the Maui fires or from the Western North Carolina with the flooding, while that was a storm, that was something that was unexpected. It was happening in real time. And I think that goes back to stress the importance of kind of having some of the plans. While no, they weren't prepping and they didn't have a person set aside to do communications, they still had a plan of how do we communicate with each other. We have a check-in thing, we have a number, we have a messaging communication. Having those in those moments, because I mean there were people literally running for their lives from fire, in their house, watching it come down the street, or watching water rise and rise and rise with nowhere to go, and then trying to check on each other. I think having that communication there, again, back to the importance of employees first, that's important. Then at that point, you can start figuring out, we need to get a message up. We've got something else. And if you have those plans in place, it's not I can't even think about putting a message up right now because I'm still trying to figure out how to get out of my house. Somebody can handle that part of the process. So I just think that's going outside of hurricanes. This is really where it starts to stress the importance of a plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the final note on being safe, I think we all are very curious when these types of things happen, always following along and kind of looking for pictures and videos potentially. And I think that if you are able to do that and, it's a safe thing to do and it's a responsible thing to do, by all means, take pictures and take videos and post them if it's appropriate, but don't put your life at risk or your safety or any of your team members to try to get a great shot. It's just not worth it. And Murphy's Law says hurricanes always hit at night anyway. So, and then the post-storm. So Scott, it might have been you that selected the word triage here, and I think it's very appropriate and accurate. So can you talk about what it's like in the immediate aftermath of a storm, particularly as a property manager or business owner?
Sure. In terms of process, it's basically the storm prep in reverse. Every home has to be unprepped, if you will. Furniture has to go back outdoors, outdoor furniture, the garbage cans do. And you need an initial assessment where there is damage, and it has to be done very quickly because, as I mentioned, after particularly hurricanes, and that seems to be our focus, we do want to acknowledge there are a lot of other things out there that you deal with and we've dealt with in the past, everything from oil spills to fires to volcanoes, as Tim mentioned. So expect the unexpected, but the unit assessment has to begin immediately. We used a tool actually that Tim had helped us build to track all the different types of damage by unit. So we would be able to sort it by roof damage, windows, carpet, water extraction, all the little things that could happen. So we could put them in categories and line up the appropriate subcontractors to do that work. We also lined up those subcontractors well before a storm comes because the competition for getting help from a limited labor pool becomes very, very difficult. And and the longer that timeline extends out, the worse the damage becomes. And I mentioned black mold a little earlier, but really in 24 hours, you could see black mold growing. So there's some things that you really need to get on right away and, secure the homes from additional damage because often these storms are followed by large other thunderstorms and other events that are just going to beat on you for a while. So just that post-storm assessment is the first thing that you need to do. And then again, as Grace mentioned earlier, make your communications cadence predictable. Every morning at 9 p.m. or a.m. there'll be an update. Every evening at 5 p.m. there'll be an update. And that keeps your folks, the people that you need out in the field able to be there because it's all hands on deck. I don't care if you were a secretary and never been in a rental house. When there's a storm, everybody is out there doing what they can. And so just having those assignments pre-assigned, a schedule, and just reversing the process that you had when you secured the homes to do an initial assessment. And then one thing also I put on this list is that pre-storm, we have a group, we had a group of homeowners that we knew would make their homes available if we had displaced employees, if we had to put insurance adjusters in them, if we had to put workmen in them. Those owners were very generous during those periods and helping get back on your feet. And so I'd have that game plan ready as well.
Yeah. And don't sleep on the networking, right? If you can be friends with someone in a neighboring market, you might be really glad you did, either getting a bunch of bookings in November that you didn't expect, right? Or being able to reallocate guests, which when we talk about that difference in how this could be a good PR thing, they might be understanding that there was a storm. Obviously, they could not stay. They're unable to stay at the property they booked. But if you were to able to set them up with a great place down the way, they'll be appreciative of that, y'all. And I remember after the West North Carolina floods, I had a prospect that I was talking to go out and see within an hour, to your point, Scott, our family vacation rental home. He didn't have to do that. This is an amazing industry. And folks are happy to check on their neighbors, I find, more often than not. And they were able to catch a fridge that had, got rid of all the water out of it and were able to action that before it became a massive issue. So lots of opportunities to network while you're triaging as well and rely on the other folks in this industry.
To your point, Jared, too, believe it or not, we picked up properties after every event because there was a lot of positive buzz about how we handled things. And you're always going to have a few people a massive event like that, you're not going to catch everything. And there's going to be people who feel their company didn't do what they should have, and they're comparing it against what you have done. And that's why if you can make yourself the authority, the go-to place to get information, not just for your homeowners and your guests, but for the general public, and a good social media presence there. We had a young man that was just had a huge following because he was goofy as could be, but he literally we had one storm, I think it was Irene, Tim, where he had a friend videoing him. He's paddling a kayak down the highway, and those kind of things resonate with people, and that information, and you do a good job under hard situation that gives you credibility as you pick up new owners.
Yeah, like if their current provider seemed woefully unprepared, rental revenue, what is that? Like, they're not a good steward of my home, right? Is what they're going to go back to. And that's going to be almost secondary, if they don't think their place is being taken care of.
Right. And then we kind of jumped over to the recovery slide here, but it, kind of feeding off of that same vein, you get to a certain point in this process where your team becomes very fatigued and you are very tired, and it becomes very emotional, and your homeowners are anxious. And, having really solid messaging and having kind of leading with kindness and having compassion for everyone involved in the situation is going to be really, really important for you to kind of come out the other side with your reputation intact and with your employees satisfied and pleased to still be there, and your homeowners, of course. I had never heard of the phrase "how to eat an elephant." I'm from the north. This might be a thing. But until Hurricane Irene, and it was just like, there's no better way to sum it up. It's just this monumental task of feeling overwhelmed and accountable to a lot of different, people involved. So, just keeping your chin up and doing the best that you can to help others, I think you'll always find yourself where you're supposed to be. And recovery could be a week, or it could be 2 weeks, or it could be 2 years, depending on what kind of an event you've experienced. So, having a right attitude from the beginning is going to serve you very well. So, in recovery, be real, don't be dramatic, don't pretend like everything's fine when it's not. But, just you can rely on past storms and your own experience to kind of talk about, what might be going on the ground, and then just be human. I think, sometimes we are trying to always craft very professional messaging about, when it comes to our business and our company, and especially if homeowners are paying attention. But it's okay to kind of let your hair down in these moments and just, express gratitude, say you're tired, you're humbled, you're simultaneously grateful and devastated probably in these kind of moments. And I think being truthful is the best way to do it, and be a resource. That always makes you feel better. So speaking of great resources, we wanted to give a shout out to the hospitality heroes. I'm going to let Tim kind of take it from here and talk about what this group does.
Yeah, they're a new nonprofit startup. They're focused around this very topic of helping out with disasters, whatever it be. It's a team, three, Rochelle, April, and Sue. They've put this together, and it's a great operation from what Rochelle's talking about, past few months of what they were building, and they're set up to do, like we mentioned before, just being a good neighbor. I mean, to help connect people. We're in an industry where everybody is like family, and it's reaching out and help each other in the middle of those things. There may be a little bit of that hub to some of that connections, and another hub to some of those connections that you can get. They've got links on their site. Check them out. Read about hospitalityheroes.org. You can sign up there. You can actually donate to help them out if you want to do that, or you can volunteer. So if you're in an area, I mean, you can be not that far away from a disaster, and they're doing recovery and shoveling, sand and mud out of places. Take your team for it, volunteer, take your team for a day. You don't even have to do it with them, just do it otherwise, but go help and out. This is just one to help get those needs. So if you deal with something or you've got something that happens, reach out to them. If you're trying to plan for something, reach out to them. It's a great organization. So
Yeah, and Tim, I'd add to that their main focus really is people who work in the hospitality
yes,
industry. In other words, we focus on the owners a lot and trying to protect their investment. We focus on the guests who, in good faith, made a booking and we're looking forward to a wonderful vacation. And we often forget, the people in our industry and the impact on them. And Hospitality Heroes is trying to build a network where we help one another during these storms, whether it's temporary housing, whether it's monetary donations. I know that they're out fundraising now, but these four ladies are all remarkable, number one, and they've really picked a great thing to put their efforts toward.
and there's a link right there too, that they were just on the Linnell's podcast there. So the How We Grow podcast. So you can learn more about them there too.
Yeah, definitely check these guys out. And then if you are interested, you can scan this QR code right here and download our checklist that we put together for all of you in terms of preparing for storm season or whatever disaster you might be vulnerable to. And while we don't have a lot of time, but while we're doing this, do we have any questions that we want to try to address?
I think a lot of the questions came through the chat, which we answered. So I think we're good there.
Great. Well, this was a lot of fun going down memory lane myself and getting to have some great conversations with a great team. But if any more questions do come through after the fact, you're always
Grace, can
welcome
you go back one slide real quick for
to
somebody
read any of us. Yep,
There we go. There. In case they want to get that. I can leave it up there for a minute. Sorry to interrupt you.
that's okay. But yeah, please feel free to reach out, and we are really grateful for all of you to joining.